Hi, everyone. I'd like to warmly welcome each of you to the very first MSM Thinkin Canada event hosted by our organization. My name is Donna Hooker, and I am the president of MSM Higher Ed. I would like to start first by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and in collaboration. Thank you. I'm very excited for today's event, which will cover the very timely theme, Canadian leadership and innovation, lessons in higher education during COVID-19. Today's webinar is an inaugural event and will kickstart a Canadian series that will shed light on some of the pressing issues and opportunities surrounding higher education and international education sector in Canada. Every event will feature highly esteemed speakers, as we have today, and thought leaders in the industry who will provide their valuable insights to the latest developments in international education and in education in general. Before I proceed with introducing the speakers, please allow me just to tell you a little bit about MSM. MSM is a leading service company that provides marketing, administrative, agents management, and student recruitment support to educational institutions in the US, the UK, Australia, Canada, and in Ireland. We find it important as an organization to stay connected with our partner institutions across the globe. We put a premium on events like these so that we can feel the pulse of the international education body that we serve. Today's webinar will unearth the hard facts that have shaken the higher education industry in the last couple of years. The pandemic has impacted higher education institutions in more ways than one. Education delivery has had to shift from traditional online in just a matter of weeks. International enrollment numbers can be down in many institutions, and the decrease in revenues has threatened the sustainability of many institutions. However, as our guests will discuss, there are lessons to be learned and applied moving forward. Indeed, we are grateful for the presence of our industry experts today who will share their valuable knowledge and experience, and our guests in higher education sector who have joined us as participants today. Welcome to you all. Can you change the slide, please? Thank you. Our special guests for today carry out with them many years' experience in Canada's higher education sector. They're here to share with us all of their thoughts and ideas on the topic of Canadian leadership and innovation during the pandemic. Let us start with Ajay. Ajay is the president and CEO of Vancouver Community College. He has a collaborative approach to leading and builds positive relationships through a philosophy of shared vision and leadership. This is brought about not only by his extensive experience in the academy, but also with his exposure working with a handful of sports programs over the last 20 years. Our next speaker is Denise Amyot. Since 2013, Denise has served as the president and CEO of Colleges and Institutions Canada. She's the voice of Canada's colleges, institutions, CEGEPs, and polytechnics, and is an international leader for education for employment in over 25 countries. She's held multiple leadership positions from both the private and public sectors, including roles such as in organizations such as Canada Science and Technology Museum Corporation, where she was the president and CEO. Rounding off the list of participants, I would like to introduce Don Mills. Don is the former CEO and owner of Corporate Research Associates, Inc., now known as Narrative Research. He's an active entrepreneur and an advocate for change in Atlantic Canada. He's recognized as a public opinion expert by various judicial bodies and is a certified research insights professional. Welcome to each and every one of you. Let's start on our session for today. Without further ado, our discussion will be around Canadian leadership and innovation, lessons in higher education during COVID-19. Let's first talk with you, Don.
Sure. Good morning, everyone.
Don, how do you think, when we think about education and international education, how do you think these areas are shaping the future of our communities in our country?
Well, let's start with some numbers. My background is looking at data and analyzing data. If you look at what's happened in the world since the year 2000, in that year, there were about 2 million international students. And currently, that's moved up to 5 million around the world. And it may surprise people, but Canada is now the third most popular destination for foreign students in the world, only behind the United States and Australia. Why is Canada sought after as an education place? It's really because we have a reputation as a multicultural and largely tolerant society with high education standards, and we're known really for safe, secure, and welcoming communities. So to put that in the Canadian context, prior to COVID, the year before COVID, I guess, there were about 640,000 international students in the country. That had tripled over the previous decade. And Ontario actually had about 50% of that. So, these are big numbers. And why is it important? Well, it's important for a couple of reasons. I look at it from both an economic and a population growth perspective. So let's talk about the economic impact alone. So the post-secondary institutions in Canada, according to the most recent data, spend about $40 billion a year. And they employ, I think, close to 200,000 people. So they're a big economic driver in our economy, first of all. And by the way, for those who run post-secondary institutions, we need to talk about that story, because people forget how important post-secondary institutions are to economic growth. Now, as most people who work in post-secondary education know, the availability of 18 to 24-year-old Canadian students has really greatly diminished over the years because of the aging population. And so there's actually been a need for post-secondary institutions to look for other markets for students. And as I said, the growth in international students has really been spectacular over the last 20 years. So we're in a good place to attract and to gain from that marketplace. The other thing that I think that's really important and sometimes is underestimated is the role that post-secondary institutions play, not only in attracting foreign students to their institutions, but in terms of providing a source for immigration to our country. And I think that this is really, really important. I was involved in a study a couple of years ago for the Atlantic Association of Universities, where we went out and surveyed both domestic students and international students. And I was really quite surprised by the results. We asked, the percentage of people studying in Canada who would prefer to stay in Canada after graduation and remain in the country. The number was 62%. 62% of foreign students wanted to stay in Canada. Not only that, and this is even more important, they wanted to stay in the very communities where they were educated. Why would that be? Well, most of them would have spent a number of years being assimilated into those communities, developing relationships and friendships, making connections. Of course, they wanted to stay in those communities. This is very important, especially for smaller provinces like the Atlantic Canada, in Atlantic Canada, where we've struggled with population growth for some time until recently. So I think that that's why international students are so important, and why we really need to make it easier for them to stay when they come to our post-secondary institutions.
Thanks so much, Don, for those comments. And as an organization, MSM got its roots by starting with a recruitment initiative in a very small college in northern British Columbia. And we firsthand were able to see the impact of changing a community by bringing students to that community for study purposes. Those students ended up employed, making friends, and many of them are continue to live in that community today. And in many ways, we ended up with a reputation of being an organization that supports smaller rural communities, which of course is not the only component of our work, but definitely it was where it was most recognized and noticed. And I think the impact that you're talking about is definitely felt in those areas for sure.
Could I just make one other quick point I forgot to make? Each foreign student spends roughly about $35,000 a year. And not only that, but they pay full rate for their tuition. They're paying the full going rate, so it doesn't cost Canadian taxpayers any money. All that money is economic, or development oriented. It brings a lot of money into the country, and I think that that's another point that should be emphasized.
Yeah, very good point. Very, very good point. Thank you so much.
There's another one, Donna, if I may, for Don. But the advantage also of international students is that it is helping domestic students to take some programs. And the reasons I mention this is because sometimes in rural or northern or more isolated areas, where there are international students, it means that the institutions can offer a program that otherwise they would not be able to offer, because there would not be enough students to justify that offering. So, and this is something that often people do not realize. And I want to talk about a myth also that exists. And the myth is that, international students take the seat of domestic students when they are contingency on some programs. No, it's not the case, because those programs, in fact, are not affected by the international students. So I just want to make sure that we add those two elements, if I may.
I think that was very well, a very great points to make, Denise. In fact, not only for small rural programs, but in my own experience, I've seen brand new programs that are being introduced at an institution that don't have the reputation yet within the community, and they're able to be launched as a result of the trust and confidence that international students have in our education system. So I think that's another example of how international students play a unique role of creating capacity. Thank you. I'd like to hear a little bit more on how the pandemic has actually impacted institutions. Maybe AJ, you would be able to share with us, how has COVID-19 affected your institutional plans?
Thanks very much, Donna, and good morning, everybody. I think the best way to summarize experience most institutions, there was the immediate pivot that you had to make, and the shift that we've kind of still in, and now we're looking at what I would call recovery, or I think many of us are now starting to call it the new norm. Well, I think we will all agree as post-secondary educators at all levels that the pandemic forced us to change in ways that would have taken years, maybe even decades, for us to move to. And a credit to faculty, staff, administration, and governments as well, in terms of how they were able to support the shift and come up with innovative ways of how education could be delivered, more effective ways. And some real ground level examples would be, we started using virtual reality and augmented reality in our vocational training to train automotive technicians, to do culinary, to do hospitality, to do some of our salon spa programs. So there was a way to use technology to actually achieve the learning outcomes. And those are technologies that we will now sustain moving forward, which increases capacity. The other thing about the shifting to online, we talk about the populations that have been disproportionately affected as a result of the pandemic. That shift to online allowed a lot of the institutions to actually offer their programming to a wider audience, including international students that were studying from their home countries. And so that, I think, solidified Canada. So there was those fundamental changes in how our programming, and some of those are now going to be legacies, I believe, as we move forward. And obviously there's going to be change that will happen. But I think one of the most important things that at least we found, and this is a credit to the federal government, a credit to the provincial government, and in general, all of the post-secondaries, Canada's response to the pandemic, particularly in support of the international students, was probably second to none across the world. And I think it truly reflected the values of Canada. But going back to Don's initial point, why did international students actually come here to study? We've just validated that in our handling of how we supported students through the pandemic at various levels. And I think that will play well if we capitalize on that opportunity. And it will also serve the economic realities that Don referred to, where we know immigration is going to be absolutely critical. And again, coming out of the pandemic, we know a number of the groups were disproportionately affected. We know there's going to be probably a pending labor market shortage. The old adage of jobs without people and people without jobs, we are going to have that challenge. And in the two-year college programs, that is going to be absolutely critical. We are absolutely facing a shortage that we will need to fill with immigration, and the best immigrants we now know are international students. And I think the federal government has stepped up in their policy initiatives to help support that, with help from groups like Colleges Institutes Canada, the Canadian Bureau for International Education, Polytechnics Canada, Universities Canada. So all those groups working together collectively to push for some of these policy shifts was absolutely critical, because we are going to have to fill that labor market gap. And I think Denise will probably agree with me here, that the colleges and institutions are best positioned to help fill that gap. And Don, to your point, 62% of those students wanting to stay here and become permanent residents in the communities in which they've been educated is absolutely a connecting line that we have to make. So yeah, for us, I think there was being stronger together, but we're now using the theme of how we're going to thrive together as an institution, and the international students are going to make a critical part of that movement forward.
Could I just add one thing that the federal government did, which I think, recognizing the role that post-secondary institutions play in sourcing future immigrants, is that they created the postgraduate work permit, which I think was really an important decision. It gives foreign students an opportunity to gain work experience that helps them qualify for the Express Entry program. And as most people know, immigrants are rated on a comprehensive ranking system that awards high proficiency in either official language educational credentials and skilled work experience. So getting that work experience is critical to keeping immigrants in our country. So I think that that's been a very important improvement, I think, that the federal government put in place.
If I could add, sorry, go ahead, Denise.
I was going to say that, this working permit for graduate students during the pandemic did not happen just by chance. We had to lobby to make sure that the online educations of students that could not come to the country were able to still be eligible. And this didn't happen just by accident. We really had to work together with IRCC to demonstrate the benefits for the students, the benefits for the institutions, and at the end, the benefit for the country. So I thought it would be important to highlight this.
Yeah, I was going to add that point, and to Don, your point. I can speak for VCC, but I'm sure this happened across a number of institutions. Is we were actually able to get new programming up and running because we were able to offer some of these things remotely because of the policy shifts that Denise talked about, where we advocated. But it was to meet labor market demands. So we know that these are jobs that are available that won't necessarily get filled by our Canadian population or our domestic population, and that they're badly needed in the areas of health, in the areas of trades, in the areas of technology, and those are still going to be gaps. I think we will see in due course, and that we are going to have to fill some of those gaps. So the innovation that happened as a result of some of these shifts, I don't think we can lose sight of that. Notwithstanding, we know people went through real struggles, but I think there are some real positive stories out of this that will serve Canada well into the future.
All such great points, and I just have to acknowledge that my own personal agreement with the strategies of the, dealing with the demographic decline of our own population and the utilization of international students who are self-qualifying at their own expense to be viable new permanent residents has been, definitely noticed across the world and across the globe. Easily, other countries are attempting to copy this model because it's been such an incredibly successful model. But no other country has really done the stellar job that Canada has done, even through the pandemic, and addressing students like they are very, very important to our nation. And so thanks to the good work of all the lobbyists and people that have put their efforts behind making that a reality for us. I think it's been very, 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 very well received by students and in the marketplace. Denise, I wonder if
Donna, maybe I'll add some examples to what you're saying, because maybe the participants are not aware of what kind of support. The institutions were incredible during that whole process, because some international students could not leave. They had to stay, but in some cases, everything was closed. So they did everything to ensure that the students could have a place to stay. Sometimes it meant keeping residences open, and in some cases, even renting hotels in order to ensure physical distance, providing equipment to students also that maybe didn't have it. I've seen vouchers, grocery vouchers for students. And we were also able to convince the Immigrations and Refugee and Citizenship Department to accept that students could work more than the number of hours that they are allowed to work. If I recall well, it's 14 or 20, because there are two numbers that I always mix. But for special reasons, they were able to be able to work more hours because there was such a big demand for many types of skills, and people and those students were keen to help, because at the same time it helped with their Canadian experience. So I want to mention the great work done by institutions in Canada, because I know other countries were told, the students were told, you leave, and you leave now. And so that's not what we did in Canada. And I'm very proud of the support that the federal government gave also to us, to allow us to be able to support those students.
I'd like to add to what Denise says, is that the other thing we all have to remember is the students that were in the country, they all stepped up as part of their communities to support the COVID recovery and dealing with that, whether that was volunteering their time in meal distributions like we had here, whether it was students creating things to create fundraisers, whether they were just volunteering their time in supporting some of the long-term care facilities, whatever that was, they just like everybody else stepped up to the plate. They were part of our community. They were part of our recovery. And we should acknowledge that. That really goes to the sense of belonging within the community, because they were able to step up. Again, notwithstanding many had difficulties, but they stepped up to help us through what was a challenging time, just like everybody else did. And that is really heartening. And I think it truly shows why students do want to come here.
Oh, such great stories. It really reinforces how it does take a village, and what a great village Canada really can present from all of our collective efforts. It's such great news and a story for us to tell. Denise, I'm wondering if I could just ask you, in terms of CI Can, how has the pandemic experience shaped your innovation for CI Can, for partnerships, future decision making, etc.?
Oh my God, how many hours do we have? So I have to say the last 20 months have been crazy busy. I'll just give a couple of examples. Like, we are working right now, because of the pandemic, with 22 departments, 22 federal departments. So we're not working with one federal department to help to our students, whether they are domestic or international students. So if I look specifically at international students, this has meant work with IRCC, but also Public Health Agency of Canada, Health Canada, Canadian Border Services of Canada, even Transport Canada. Because you may not know, but Transport Canada is the authority that decides what's the proportions of online services that is allowed for the people that work in aeronautic mechanics. So that meant we are working with that department also. But from an innovation point of view, what is very interesting is that there are two things. First, the partnerships that we have intensify with a number of groups. I mentioned the federal departments, but also the regional associations across the country. During the last, I would say, the first 15 months probably of the pandemic, we were talking every week, if not sometimes with some of them every day, because of some specific issues. Because what was happening in one part of the country, we knew that it was probably coming to another part of the country. But also working closely with Universities Canada, my counterpart, to ensure that we could work together towards finding solutions for students. What I did also, 1 month into the pandemic, I put in place a network of post-secondary education institutions that work at the national level. And to this day, we're still meeting once every 3 weeks to talk about the different issues. And because in a country like Canada, we don't have a federal Ministry of Education. So we don't have this type of mechanisms that help when there are things like that. So we needed to step up ourselves and fill those gaps to ensure that we could work together. But let me give you two very cool examples of innovations that have happened. So one of the things that institutions told us that they were struggling with was the online, when you do technical and professional training, or TVET, like they say in some countries. And they were saying, look, we can use virtual reality, but it's very expensive, and we can produce maybe a 5 minutes or a 10 minutes. So we were able to convince the Federal Department of ESDC to do a pilot. And first, we did a survey of all our members. We also asked them which area are the most demanding. And they said laboratory technician, nursing, and paramedic. And they said those are the areas that are the most urgent. So we were able to get funding to produce, in fact, 130 open education resources that use augmented or virtual reality in those three sectors. And those are being done right now. But what is very special is that it is a collaborations between colleges and universities, because universities are also contributing to those tools. I don't think this would have happened if COVID would not have happened, because what happened is that COVID has forced the innovation, but has highlighted the need to collaborate together. So now you have colleges from across the country, sometimes with universities or without, depending on what is the program, developing those very cool tools that will be able to serve the entire country. So I mentioned this because it is a prime example of the type of cooperation. Do I have time to give another quick example?
Sure.
Okay, very, very quick. Of course, we all have discovered, in fact, around the world, that there was an issue with long-term care. There was not enough people to help in that profession. So we were approached, in fact, by the government to develop a program that could be offered across the country. Very short program, 6 weeks program, all online. And it was developed by 14 colleges together, coming together to develop this program using the best of what they offer. And the students have started to graduate from that program. It's very cool, 6 weeks only. And what happened is that the students, not only do they take this micro credentials of 6 weeks, but after they go for 4 months of internships. At the end of their internships, they are assessed for the competencies they have acquired, and they can enter into the full program of their respective province. We would never have seen something like that without COVID. And now we have this proof of concept. It means we could do it basically for any program. And the government just gave us the authorization to provide a stipend of $5,000 for each of those students if they want to pursue into the full program. So very, very exciting when you talk about innovations. And I would have other examples, but we want to hear more of Don and Ajay as well.
You such great examples, and I cannot tell you the number of times through this COVID pandemic crisis that I thought to myself, what would we have done if we did not have the technology we have today? How would we have survived? And you've just given such great examples. And it's a lovely segue into the topic of sustainability, Ajay. And I'm wondering what lessons from the pandemic you've learned or VCC has learned, and how it might affect future practices around international student recruitment, education delivery, you spoke about a bit already, and campus growth overall.
So I'll go back to, I think we all can agree that Canada's handling of the pandemic has served us well in positioning us, as Don said, the third most popular destination, and in a number of countries, the most popular destination to come to. So leveraging that, we know coming out of the pandemic, the effect that it's had on our local populations across the country, and it's disproportionate between rural and urban areas, Indigenous, non-Indigenous populations as well. I think the opportunity for us to now really look at the labor market need and the gaps that exist, and to create programming or emphasize programming in those areas. So at VCC, we would be looking at what are the labor market needs, not just British Columbia, but in our region right here. What do I need in Metro Vancouver? Where do we need more help in healthcare and technology and auto? You've got that. So you've got a programming element. And I do want to put in there, we've seen the emergence of the climate, the green technology that's emerging. And we know there are a number of other countries that are well ahead in some of those developments than we are. And there are other places where we are ahead. So there's a real opportunity for innovative and new programming to come out of that. So I think you're going to have to look at programs that really line up with labor market needs. We know Don's got a 62%. I'll challenge that number is probably higher in terms of international students that want to come here and become immigrants in the communities that they are educated. So the challenge in British Columbia, I think, will be to ensure that we are taking advantage of what are the federal policies that have been advocated for that exist. How do we then line up the gap in the labor market with the provincial nominee program, with the education that we deliver here in public post-secondary, and ensure that there is a continuum so that a student sees a much more clean pathway into that opportunity. Notwithstanding, there'll be some students that will come and they'll want to go back to their home countries or some other country for that matter, and serve those well as well also. So I think from a sustainability perspective, it is going to be offering what is the need and where the people are, and combining those two. And I'm really quite confident that Canada will come out ahead on this one. And I'm quite confident that the colleges and institutes will actually lead the way in this area, particularly filling the labor market shortage. And I'll keep using that word because that is what's creating, and it'll create the opportunity as an institution to try new programs. So areas where we're not going to, you'll see a few new programs coming out from VCC next year that we traditionally may not have done in the past, but now the labor market need is there. We know the students are there. It'll be a good portion of it will be international students and some domestics, and we're going to be able to move forward. And then there'll be others where we're going to get creative and say, okay, we've got a huge gap here. We're not going to fill that gap with our current student population or even reskilling and upskilling. So how do we address those? And then there's the emergence of the new areas, particularly the clean tech, the climate change. Those are all new evolving areas where we're going to need international collaboration, and that's where international students will bring a whole different richness to that opportunity.
I wonder if I could just make a recommendation or a couple of recommendations to the post-secondary sector. I sat on the Dalhousie Board of Governors for almost a decade, so I have kind of an insider view of post-secondary institutions. I spent the last decade advocating for population growth in our region and our country. I think it's imperative that we keep growing our population due to the labor market challenges that Ajay is referring to. But one of the things, and this really comes out of my role as an employer, that I found with international students was that when they came for interviews, the vast majority of them did not have the necessary proficiency of the language to be hired. This is really critical, especially for what I would call client-facing work. And so here's what I'm advocating for post-secondary institutions. I just indicated that 6 out of 10 international students want to stay in the community where they're educated. So think about that as an institution. How could you leverage that? How about starting when they register and ask them the question, do you have any interest in staying in Canada after you graduate? If yes, institute a couple of what I would call enhancements to how you deal with those students, starting with better language training. That should be a part and parcel of getting them ready for the marketplace. making sure that they have what I would call, cooperative work term, work experience, so they can get that work experience before graduation. Helping them with the paperwork to get their postgraduate work permits in place. Make it as easy as possible for them to stay. I don't think there are many institutions that recognize that there's an opportunity, a bigger opportunity, if they stream the international students into at least 2 groups to begin with. An enhanced sort of stream for those who really want to stay. They might not stay, but they have a better chance of staying and getting employment. And those who just want the experience of being educated in Canada.
So I have to react to that, and I'm sure, AJ, you will want to react to this because I know you have some concrete examples. In fact, Don, I cannot talk about the institutions that you mentioned, but I can certainly talk about what's happening at the college and institute level. And in the colleges, it's very interesting because they prepare you for the job market. So
Right.
the first day you arrive, you're hands-on. And it is really to prepare you with simulations, with real life experience and so on. There are many clinics and all that. And so that's the first thing. Most of our programs, I think it's 98%, have either a co-op program or an internship program. In fact, it's compulsory in most of the programs to have this if you want to graduate. So it means that you really get that Canadian work experience before you graduate. Third, there's also we have some specific programs, for example, for immigrants that arrive to Canada that already have studied in a given profession and where they can focus for a year or 6 months, depending on the needs, on the specific language that is related to their profession, so that they don't have to repeat necessarily everything. And I'm sure, AJ, you can give example of when you were at Langara or what you do currently at VCC.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that, Donna. First of all, I think I'll start from a VCC context, but maybe and then go connect to where Denise had it. From a VCC context, it is what we do. So when you look at, we have the largest language integration for newcomers in the province of British Columbia, bar none. So we do that. And that integration is either them getting the language and then moving back into the workforce because they've got the credentials, or them pathwaying into something different. That word pathways is, I know, used in many senses, but at VCC, pathways is about accessibility, and Donna can speak to this as well. It's about the students getting and lifting themselves up to a level of competency so that they can actually enter into the streams of health, trades, technology as they want to move forward in their career. So there's that pathway opportunity. The other piece is language is specifically for some of those professions. We need to get our mindset out of the traditional academia language. Sometimes you need the language for the workforce, and that's maybe a different type of skill set that you need. And there are a number of programs I can speak to, not only in our institution, but probably throughout the country. Denise will probably can speak to them as well, where you need certainly need a certain level of language proficiency.
Yeah.
But you also need the skills along with that.
Yeah.
And the combination of the two make them highly employable and affordable, and that they are on the immigrant stream. So where I think you do make up a very good point, Don, is that we need to really maybe create 2 streams for the student. Are you wanting to be an immigrant? And what does that stream look like? What is that uplifting that we have to do to help integrate you into that? And from my own institution's perspective, I will say, we haven't done the data, I admit, during COVID, because we just haven't had time, but pre-COVID, there was very little difference between how our international students did and how our and domestic students in terms of pure academics. What was even more resonating was they both had the same percentage of job opportunities when they got to market rate. 95% of them got jobs in the fields that they were trained in, and it did not matter whether they were an international student or that they were a domestic student. And that's because many of our programs are applied. It is just built into the curriculum. It is threaded through there so that when they are coming out into the workforce, they understand what work they're looking for. It is a smoother transition, so it's not a career counseling transition as much as you've been working as an auto tech. You should have had experience in the garage. and now you know where to actually go find those jobs. So I think we do have to look at programmatically how some of those things, whereas there's more traditional academic studies where I do believe a certain quite a high level of language proficiency is required, a certain level of academic writing skills are clearly required for them to advance, and for appropriate reasons to make sure that they meet the outcome. So it is a bit of this balance act.
I couldn't hear what you said.
I'm just going to.
Somebody's Siri.
So I'm just going to, in the interest of time, that was a great segue actually to thinking about how institutions and education is working together with the community. I'm wondering if I can just wrap up our questions with one for Dawn, which is, what other ways do you think institutions can work with communities to more closely build local, provincial, and national capacity?
Well, that's a good question. I'll give you a couple of suggestions. One is work with the employers as closely as you can, and to define what their needs are. But more importantly, and I've been advocating this for a while, I do a lot of public speaking, especially with groups in the private sector. And I always say, what is your strategy to become more welcoming to immigrants into your workforce? How diverse is your workforce? Because a lot of people don't realize that they actually have to work at it. It doesn't come naturally for most organizations. So, you know, if you're a college in some small community in Canada, like, reach out to the major employers and make sure that they're on board to create what I call a welcoming community. This is, I think, really key. The other thing that I would do is create relationships with groups that support the immigrant community, and making sure that, because they have all kinds of programming too, right? They have all kinds of programming to help people get located properly, make the connections, register where they need to, all those sort of things that are hard for somebody coming to a new country. So, you know, connect with the business community, make sure that they understand what their role is in terms of building a more welcoming community, because, you know, Canadians are friendly, for sure, but, you know, welcoming is a different level of friendliness. You know, it means, you know, going out of your way to become friends with people from other cultures and other countries. And I think that, especially in, you know, regions outside of, I think, BC and Ontario, you know, are not quite as diverse as perhaps, you know, Toronto, with 50% of its population born somewhere else. You know, 1 out of 5 Canadians are immigrants, right? So, but in our region, only 1 out of 20 are at the last census. So, you know, we don't really have a lot of experience living and working with diverse cultures. We have to learn how to do that. But a lot of Canadians, a lot of other people in this country have to do the same. So I think by reaching out to partners, I guess, making sure there's a more collaborative effort to not only recruit but retain in your community immigrants is the best advice that I can give.
If I may add just a very quick comment. Earlier, Don talked about the importance of international students and immigrants, and now he is talking about how to ensure we can retain them and all that. So in June, we published a report that I have put in the chat box, and it's a report that, in fact, talks about how we could ensure that we support more international students with respect to immigration. And we make 3 specific recommendations to the federal government to that effect, because we really think that, you know, if those recommendations are followed, we will be able to provide a clear path to modernizing and streamlining our immigration systems. And this October, a few weeks ago, we published another report exactly in what Don talked about, how to make sure that we use those settlement settlement service agencies, and how they can work together with the post-secondary institutions, in fact, to better support people that decide to stay in Canada and to return them. So I don't think I will have time to put the reference to that report, but if you find one, you will find the other report as well. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned this because you know, international students or honestly our best way to speed up with the big targets that we have, the increasing targets we have with respect to the immigration levels. And if we just look at what happened recently, a number of months ago, the government allowed international students that were here that met certain criteria to become permanent resident. And this was the fastest sold out, if you want, program that was ever in place. And so we need more of those.
Thank you so much, all of you, actually. It's been such a great pleasure moderating this session with such incredibly bright and talented and knowledgeable panelists as you are. I'm so, so interested myself to learn the impact that COVID has had, which I think we've all experienced, that just continues to reinforce the importance of international students in our communities. We talked about sustainability, we talked about the economic impact, the population decline or potential for growth, and the demands for labor market and how international students can play such a significant role. And how I think what is really important is that the pandemic has helped us all to collaborate, work together, partner even more than ever. And I really, truly hope that we will sustain that well into the future, and that this lesson learned of collaboration and cooperation will continue to evolve and develop across the sector as we move forward. I hope that we will see you all again at another MSM Thinkin Canada. We plan to have these events almost monthly, not 100% monthly, but close to a monthly sort of schedule. So I just once again want to just close this session off by really thanking you for all your valuable input, your thoughts and ideas, and perhaps we'll see each other face to face soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a
Take
great
good
day.
Until
care.
next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Take good care.
Thank you.